I'm going to start now then with a little background. This whole project that includes our guest speaker today was an idea that was presented to us as the Historical Society from an old family member of the Forest Park community, Wendell Ellis, who thought we should talk about people in our school district who are distinguished alumni. The first group of people that came to attention in that context were athletes that had become celebrities. We have a number of them that have gone on through the system and become, among other things, National Football League players. But we also have arts and science graduates who have become distinguished people, and the first name that came to mind in that category was Beryl. He has been with the Cincinnati Enquirer, essentially modifying what the image is of newspaper reporting or journalism in general. And I heard about that branding project by a podcast he presented with a guru of branding in the region named Enquirer, and they talked about impact journalism. That is the brand that is being pioneered at the Cincinnati Enquirer by Beryl, who's the executive editor. And the city of Forest Park, coincidentally, was also starting a branding project. Don Jones brought that to my attention in January of a year ago. And it's been going forward. So their branding and our city branding seem to be fitting together in a theme. And as a reinforcement of that concept, I saw a particular column, recent column by Beryl, published in the Enquirer. It was February 5 of this year. He published a column under the heading, School Video Sting. It was a discussion of some journalism that is not straightforward. In fact, it's a dishonest variety of deceptive journalist practices, and he wrote a column that revealed, it was an expose of that kind of vagabond journalism. Now the city and the school district might also get into a branding project together, but that's something farther down the road. Beryl and the Enquirer have become an innovation in our community of significance in their profession and world, nationally, and thinking about impact journalism. That column I just quoted is one that has had an impact. It had such an impact on me that I couldn't be a bystander for a minute after I read it any longer, and I wrote him a letter to the editor. And I said, we liked that idea so much that you expressed in that column that we want you, if at all possible, at some time to come and talk to us about your recollections of Forest Park. And that's how, after he spent time in small towns in Michigan, also in Iowa, he was in the high desert in Reno, Nevada, and in Metro Washington. But he came back, and he had to answer questions. Why would he do that? Well, he said, it's a city with small town charm, big city amenities, and besides, he went to high school here, by which he meant Forest Park. That wasn't in his original column, but I found out later that's what it was, and he was a 1984 graduate of Forest Park High School. I want you to welcome with me Beryl Love.
I was going to talk about Forest Park for a little bit as something that taught me what the importance of community is, and that's what really drives the journalism I like to do. So I might be jumping around all over the place, but I'm going to go back to this sense of community a lot. And then I really want this to be a discussion. I bore myself after a few minutes, so if you have questions or thoughts, please just shoot up your hand and we'll make this a discussion. But the sense of community, growing up in Forest Park, just like anyone who grows up somewhere, they don't realize how good they have it until they leave for many reasons. But there was a strong sense of community, especially if you at all tried to get involved. You could find a place. You could find people to form that sense of community with. And a fellow 1984 graduate of mine, recently retired Chief Elliot Isaac of the Cincinnati Police Department, and I were talking about how I got in trouble one time. I was in marching band. When you were listing the athletes that you've honored, I was not an athlete. I was in the marching band. And we had this tradition, if there was a new member of the band, we would go toilet paper their house, which my dad would never approve of. So I had to sneak out of the house the night we went to toilet paper this house. And what brought us to Forest Park is my dad was always working in youth services and was working for the Boy Scouts of America. And when we got to Cincinnati for him to take that job, one of the first things he did was start a career explorer post at the Forest Park Police Department, the first one they had. This would have been in 1977. And so my dad knew the police officers, and I knew a few of them. I wasn't in the explorer post. I was in a traditional scout troop in Forest Park, 610, which is no longer running. I'll get back to that in a minute. But anyway, we go to toilet paper this house, and a police cruiser goes by and sees us and shines the light, and we all start to run, except for me, and I stand there. And it was a police officer I knew, and he's like, "Beryl, what are you doing out here?" And I'm like, "I don't know, I'm sorry." And actually, what we didn't know was had been some auto break-ins, and so there were quite a few police officers in the K section that night. And so a few of my conspirators had gotten picked up as well. And so this particular officer drove us home. And he stopped at my friend's house. He got out of the car, went in his house. My other friend, same thing. When the officer got to my house, he said, "Beryl, how did you get out of the house?" I said, "I climbed out the bedroom window." He said, "Well, climb your ass back into that bedroom window. I want to talk to your dad." I'm like, oh my gosh. He didn't do that with any of my friends, but he took an interest in me because he knew my father. They had that relationship, and it was a village. They all wanted to work together to keep kids out of trouble. So I wake up my dad, and I'm like, "Dad, Officer Ferguson wants to talk to you." And he reaches around for the phone. He thinks he's on the phone or something. I'm like, "No, Dad, he's outside." And my dad's eyes go like this. And he walks up there, and long story short, I did get in trouble. I had to go back the next day and clean up the toilet paper. But I never forgot that personal interest that officer showed in me. He could have blown it off. He could have just dismissed it, but he cared. And that's a community by definition, people that care about each other. So I haven't had too many other brushes with the law, actually. But when I was at Forest Park High School, I had the opportunity to work on Excalibur, which is the student newspaper. Mark Elin, who was an English teacher, and if that name sounds familiar, coached the Forest Park Lady Chargers to the first state championship in the school's history. But he was also the journalism advisor. And so he was the one that kind of got me interested a little bit. But I had no idea what I wanted to do when I got out of high school. My math grades were decent, and my dad, who I already mentioned worked for the Boy Scouts, with his career in the nonprofit world, was really encouraging me to go find a job that made some money. His perception that was journalists take a vow of poverty, which they do in the early parts of their careers. And so my math grades were good enough. He said, "Well, you don't know what you want to do. Why don't you apply for engineering at UC and apply for journalism at Miami if you have to." I got accepted in the College of Engineering at UC. Lasted 2 semesters because I was spending way too much time hanging out at student media, changed majors, and never looked back with my interest of being a journalist. I remember the connection, the community that forms around, at the time, the newspaper, the college newspaper. Even when I was still in engineering, I would pick up the college newspaper to read about what was happening. I picked up the habit from my parents, reading newspapers. But I would see people writing, especially first-person columns with their picture, and just, I felt like I related to them. I felt like I knew them. I felt like I wanted to be a part of that. So I was hanging around the student newspaper way more than I was, the physics lab, and managed to get, my major changed and everything like that. If your desire is to be a journalist and work for your hometown newspaper, and your hometown newspaper is the Cincinnati Enquirer, which is a big newspaper, it's tough to get there right out of school. I interned at the Cincinnati Post, and then I left. I worked at a small paper in Michigan, then in Iowa. Then I came back to Cincinnati, which I called my first tour of duty at the Cincinnati Enquirer. That was 1998, and just in the newsroom alone, there were 220 employees, reporters, editors, photographers. We had a pop music writer, a symphony writer. We had, all of these things that newspapers of old had. And back at the time, newspapers were self-contained companies. They were led by a president/publisher. You had the news division, you had the advertising division, you had marketing, you had circulation and distribution, you had finance and billing, all these other departments, human resources. We even had a staff lawyer. That's not how newspapers are set up anymore, especially corporately owned newspapers. If your desire is to be a top editor, again, you have to be willing to move, because there's only one, well, at the time, when I was growing up, we still had the Cincinnati Post. People used to talk about the Time-Star. Those were just the dailies. There used to be weekly newspapers in just about every community. The Hilltop News that served this area was actually the first time I got paid to be a journalist, because I went on a Boy Scout camporee, and I took pictures of Troop 610 competing in some of these events, and I sent them to the offices of the Hilltop News, and they ran two of the photos and sent me a check for $15. I was a professional journalist. Yes, that's big money for me. But anyway, by the time I was entertaining the idea of being an editor-in-chief, there was only one newspaper in the city. There was already an editor here. I had to move again. And the Enquirer is owned by Gannett. At the time, we had about 90 newspapers and about 50 television stations. The company has evolved a lot since then, but we own the Reno Gazette-Journal, and I'd always wanted to live out west, had that itch to go see the world and everything like that. I didn't know much about Reno, but when I got there and realized it was 20 minutes from Lake Tahoe, I was like, all right, I'm in. And again, I learned about community, because I was not from the West. I was wearing a necktie my first day in the office, and they're like, boy, we do not wear neckties here. Someone's going to cut that off. Now, a bolo tie, now you're talking. But the community embraced me, and I realized that to do my job correctly, I had to be all in on the community. I had to learn who the people were, what makes them tick, what the issues are, the history, what they hold near and dear to them, the important things. And that's hard to do when you parachute into a new community, but I found that community, once I got through the first year or so and they saw that I was committed, I understood how important community is to journalism and how they relate. And in the back of my mind thought, wouldn't this be great to do back in Cincinnati? If I ever had the opportunity, I would jump to do that. I didn't realize that I would end up at USA Today in Washington, D.C. The company tapped me to, at the time, the company sold off the television stations. They spun off into a new company. And instead of being a holdings company with various media properties, this is all a bunch of jargon, but we decided to position ourselves as an integrated media company. And there was a time when, if there was a big story in Cincinnati, USA Today reporters might come in and work in parallel rather than together with the Cincinnati Enquirer, even though we're part of the same company. And so what we wanted to do was integrate, because the economic reality of the time is we didn't have the it didn't make sense to duplicate those resources. And also, with now close to 200 cities we were in, to beef up USA Today's national report, especially online, by integrating all the local sites. So that was my job. I went to USA Today, I lived outside of Washington, D.C., and we started the USA Today National News Desk, which integrated all these properties. And I thought that was it. I thought, okay, I'm in D.C., I'm working at USA Today. I had all these opportunities that I never thought I would have had. Sitting next to presidents, editorial board meetings with, world leaders, and there's no better place professionally to be a journalist than in Washington, D.C., but there was not that local connection. There was talk about a place that's oversaturated with journalists. It's so hard to make an impact in that setting. It can be done. But I miss the impact that local journalism has and how important it is. And fortunately for me, the company politics, the timing, everything lined up perfectly that I had the opportunity to come back and be the editor-in-chief of the Cincinnati Enquirer. I also have responsibility for all of Gannett's papers in Ohio, which includes the Columbus Dispatch, the Akron Beacon Journal, and about 18 other smaller papers. So that's what I do now. And I feel like I won the lottery that I'm the editor of the Cincinnati Enquirer, because I remember how hard it was just to get an internship there. And so I'm still like, when I walk in and, younger reporters will say, "Hey, chief," or "Hey, boss," I look around for the editor I used to report to, They're talking to me, and it still seems very, very strange. So that's who I am. That's how I got here. My passion is local journalism, and when Mr. Weirs talked about us branding ourselves, positioning ourselves as the news organization of impact, it's because people have a idea of what a newspaper is. And if you're thinking a traditional ink on paper newspaper, there was a time when we called ourselves the newspaper of record, meaning everything would be in there. Stock listings, school lunch menus, the police blotter. I mean, everything would be in there because we truly were the newspaper of record, and this is before the information revolution with everything being digital. And so if I want to know what the Forest Park City Council is doing, discussing, seeing the agenda, see a transcript of the entire meeting, I can go right to the City of Forest Park website and get all of that. We don't need news reporters to be stenographers trying to be, which I think we would fail, the newspaper of record for all the communities, all the school districts, all the governments, all the organizations we have in the city. So what is left for us to do, and that's what we should have been doing and emphasizing all along, is to do the local journalism of impact. First Amendment, open records, government accountability, the watchdog, your eyes and ears, the stories that really make a difference, that bring justice, that give a voice to those who aren't in power, and to, the old cliche that a good journalist likes to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable, in a good way, in a positive way, and understanding that it's vital to our democracy. It's called the Fourth Estate for a reason. It's the only professional endeavor that I know of that has a constitutional amendment to carve out protections for it. And so as we transition from that old industrial area, manufacturing era newspaper company to doing local journalism in the digital age, and doing both at the same time because we're in transition, that's kind of when people say, well, what does the editor of the Cincinnati Enquirer do? Do you have to read every story? I wish I could sometimes, because like you, I see the typos or the bad grammar and go, Mrs. Peterson at Forest Park High School would be ashamed of me knowing that I would. No, I am working very hard to figure out what journalism looks like today and preserve the important parts of it. So anyway, honored to be here today, thrilled to be here, and just give me the hook when time is up, but would love to just hear your questions or about anything, about the industry, about, you know, my criminal record or what, or anything in between. Yes. Question was, what's it take to get a news release in the Enquirer? Back to the paper of record, paper of impact thing. It's tough now. I really feel bad and sorry for PR people because we used to run a lot of press releases and we don't anymore. We do have a self-serve feature at the Enquirer for people to upload press releases, and we do publish a lot of that user-submitted material. But the reality is, most organizations have a social media presence, can go directly to their audience without putting us in the middle, and it's much more efficient that way than what is a mass platform. But we still want to know, we still want to hear, and we still do features, but that is part of the challenge we have is when I talk about being the news organization of impact is not being able, not having, when I said I started at the Enquirer and we had 220 newsroom employees in Cincinnati, the newsroom is 65 people. So where we used to have an army of editorial assistants entering all that information, we don't anymore. So it is hit and miss. But that's the one way we've tried to bridge the gap is having that online portal, and a lot of that is searchable in the online database. Not all of it, unfortunately, makes it into print.
A question I have that's foremost in my mind is, where do you get your news? What sources do you consider reliable?
That's a great question. What sources do I consider reliable? A lot of what I talk about to groups is news literacy, especially in the social media world that we live in. When we survey people that not necessarily are readers and ask where they get their news, they often, especially if they're digital natives, they've always grown up with the internet, with a phone in their hand, they say, oh, I get my news from Google, or I get my news from Facebook. And I say, well, how many reporters does Google have? 0. They aggregate other sources, and therefore you got to be careful. You have to know the source. So the answer to your question is multiple sources. I enjoy the Washington Post. I've liked what has happened to the Post since Jeff Bezos bought it, because they reinvested in reporters and journalism and technology.
We're talking the Washington Post?
Washington Post. They do outstanding work. The New York Times has always been the gold standard for the craft I am in, regardless of whether, you know, if you put these sources on a political spectrum, there are many people that have said that the New York Times is too liberal and have gravitated to other places. And that's why multiple sources need, when I talk about news literacy, is especially if it's a politically charged issue or a social issue, I try to read multiple sources just to get the full picture. Which, again, that's a great question, because at the Enquirer, we try very hard to do 2 things. Seek the truth. That's hard sometimes, especially if the issue's gray or politically charged. And to be balanced. And not just to fall back on he said, she said reporting because you want to try to determine the truth. But it's very hard to do what we do because in the digital era of news and information, we self-select. We seek out news and information that validates our worldview. And if we don't seek it out intentionally, the algorithms do it for us. If we lingered on a story, on a social issue that leans left or right, the interface, Facebook, whatever it is, Twitter, Google, knows that and delivers us that information, similar information from a similar point of view, because at the end of the day, they're trying to deliver advertising to us. And they know we're going to spend more time, we as humans, tend to want to self-validate. And so the serendipity, I go back to like the value sometimes of print, because we still do print. The serendipity of a print newspaper is that you can't go down the wormhole. It has a beginning and an end. It's not endless scroll. And there are trained professionals who are doing their best. We all have our bias. If a reporter and editor says, oh, I'm a professional journalist, I'm not biased, that is a lie. We all are biased. What we have to do is figure out how to mitigate our own bias, and there are ways that we do that. But those are the two I read for national news. I really enjoy some online news sources. I'm watching very closely what Axios is doing, because they are also trying to solve the dilemma of the local news deserts that have popped up over the country as newspaper companies have closed down smaller sites.
I've been a subscriber for multiple years, and it's delivered to my door. But I've noticed over the last couple of years, major news articles sometimes don't come at the time they should. It may be a day late, and you've already
Right.
absorbed with it through TV media and such. Why is that?
It's a very good question. So part of what we're doing to survive is that doing a printed edition and delivering it to the driveway is really, really expensive, and it always has been. It was the loss leader, and it was offset by advertising, print advertising, where we could set the price of a full-page ad, and we had classified pages after classified pages. So the first hit to the business model was Craigslist, and having all of that classified information, it's not classified information, classified advertising, help wanted ads, private party for sale ads, like I'm selling my pickup truck. It's way more efficient to do that online. It's way more efficient to get that info. And so as print costs have gone up, we've had to really consolidate production facilities. We're no longer printing in Cincinnati. The press is in Indianapolis. And so our deadline, when I first started at the Enquirer, we had 6 print editions. The first deadline was the early one at 11 p.m., called that the Bulldog edition. And then we had the Butler-Warren County edition. Sometimes we would split that up into Butler-Warren County. Then we would have a Cincinnati East, a Cincinnati West, and then a Kentucky zoned edition. And by the time that was all done, it was 2 or 3 in the morning. And the presses would roll probably to 4 or 5, and we could get the paper to people's driveway by 6 or 7 on a good day. Hopefully not wet. I had a woman email me her wet, soggy newspaper to make a point, and I love the passion of our readers. So that's why, as we've had to consolidate production just to make it scale economically, areas, markets like Cincinnati that don't have their own printing press and are printed far away, now our editorial close is like 6 in the afternoon. Early pages go at 3. And so what we've done is we've had to, be realistic to say that we have many platforms to deliver news on. We're online, phone apps, everything like that. That is our platform for news in real time and for breaking news. And for the print edition, not so much. We try to do our enterprise stories, our more in-depth stories. But if it's an important development, we're going to have it in the paper as well. And that's because of listening to our readers. When we went all in on digital for breaking news, we didn't have much breaking news in the print edition. It was all what we call enterprise stories or evergreen stories. And readers who grew up as print subscribers told us, look, we don't care if it's late, we want the news. If I wanted the news on my phone, I wouldn't pay for you to deliver me a paper. So even if it's a cycle and a half late, we still want it, because last thing I want to do is get on my computer or get on my phone and read news. So long answer, but that's the question. The reality is we're managing through transition. I don't know when the day is going to come when we go no print or print on Sunday. I thought it would be sooner, actually, but the market is still demanding, is still big enough, even though we have more daily subscribers now who are digital only than we have print subscribers. On Sunday print, which you can subscribe to just by itself, that's still our biggest day, still both. It's still quite large and pencils out. But we converted about 2 years ago to having, when we started digital subscriptions, which that's a whole nother story, asking people to pay for things online is really tough. Because now we're not just competing with television stations, we're competing with, because it's a digital subscription, so we're competing with Netflix, Disney Plus, Hulu. When people say, wow, I didn't realize I was subscribing to all these things. Do I need this? No, I'm done watching Yellowstone, so I don't need that anymore. And do I really need the paper? We hope the answer is yes. We hope people see the value in supporting local journalism. But that's the competitive space we're in now for digital-only subscriptions. And we're a leading market when it comes to that. Across Gannett, we're blessed in greater Cincinnati to have been very successful with digital-only subscriptions. But that's the platform. It's much more efficient for real-time news to shoot it to you on your phone than trucking it from Indiana. Yeah. And it breaks my heart. I mean, breaks my heart. I still get the print edition. I probably get it every day without fail because they know who I am and they know where I live. And they don't want the grief if I miss my paper. But I'm a parent of a teenager. You know, I work downtown. I live in Blue Ash. There are mornings, you know, I might get stuck on the phone, and I'm driving right over that orange bag. The drive of shame, I call it, because it doesn't fit in. It doesn't fit into the reality of my life like the information I have right here, you know. So I still get it. I still enjoy it. But it's tough to fit that print edition into people's lifestyle these days. So we have to be super aggressive and be where they are. You know, when I started at the Enquirer, we didn't have people on staff that were experts in search optimization and understanding social media algorithms, because a third of our digital audience doesn't come, they don't go to, it's not like they get up in the morning and say, I wonder what the Cincinnati Enquirer is reporting today. I'm going to go to the Cincinnati Enquirer app and see what's on the front page. Nobody does that. They're interested in something, so they'll say, hey Siri, what's going on with the Reds? When's Reds opening day? Or they'll type it in and search that way. And if we don't pop up first, second, or third in search, we might as well have not even done the story, not even wasted our time, because we're just invisible. Those are the jobs we have in the newsroom now, people that understand search. I don't understand it. I use it, but yes.
I'm one of those vagabonds that at one time in my life I had to decide what I was going to do for a living. And I was encouraged to take the traditional routes of medicine and engineering and things of that nature. But I took computer science because all of my behavior and attitude and approach to problem solving are based upon logic. So when I look at what you do for a living, I don't think that you're in the newspaper business. I think you're in the information business. And I think that if I owned one of your newspaper companies, I would make darn sure that everybody knew that that's what we were doing. You see, when I look at the news on TV, I feel sorry for the people that are reporting the weather, the ones, because their jobs are going to be gone. We already have plans to eliminate them. We have plans to eliminate the anchors. They're no longer needed. My point is, when most industries were put together, they were put together sort of in different places by people with different ideas. But when we put together IT, it was structured by structured thinking computer science people. So when a person says, for example, I don't know how to use a search engine, we documented how people should use a search engine. And when one is describing what they do, in their profession or what they're offering, what they sort of list at the top is going to make a big difference as to whether or not they're going to pop up quick when somebody does the search. It is extremely important. So if you're in the Enquirer, for example, and you want your company's name to come up early when people do searches, you got to make sure you're putting your identity and your services there in the proper order to get you to the top, because we have done it in a structured way. So I worry about the children, because you see, your audience right now has an age bracket that is diminishing. Not only diminishing, but being replaced by children. When they were born, the internet was already here. These IT gadgets that they used, they were already here. So all of us folks who use the Enquirer and other newspapers, we're going to be dead and gone and replaced by those people who think differently. So to survive, it's very important to anticipate what's going to happen next. I hope I didn't take too long.
No, that's absolutely true. The hope and what we work very hard for is that that local journalism finds its way to those people that aren't brand loyal, that don't subscribe to a paper, but are very good at getting news and information. And back to news literacy, and why I think we should get it back into the school curriculum, is, to make sure that the generation you speak of understands just the fundamentals of what journalism is, what reliable sources are, and I challenge, when I speak to groups, I often challenge them, especially during campaign season, when social media is a hot mess and the commenting in our articles are a hot mess, to let's all be better with what we share, the rhetoric we have online. My own dad shared something that I knew was dead wrong, and I was like, Dad, come on, we have the same name. You can't be doing that. Check your sources. Check your sources. And so I think that's part of it too. I think it's often been said that back in the glory days of the railroad industry, if the railroad executives were more concerned with shipping goods rather than driving trains, they would have gradually have become trucking companies or diversified and not just tried to preserve the tradition of driving trains. Same thing. If we want journalism to survive, we have to realize it was never about print and ink. It was about the story. It was about the reporting. It was about a free press. So even though I call ourselves a newspaper or the press, we are an information company. And because of the change of reader habits and because of what technology has done, more than ever, media literacy has to be something that we address head on.
Thank you, Beryl. I have another question, burning question. Where did you live and grow up when you were in Forest Park?
So I lived in the K section on Ken Ross Court, and it was just a short walk to the high school if you cut through the yards. I didn't think it was a short walk in 1977 when the blizzard happened. But we moved here in the 6th grade, so I went to Winton Forest Elementary. I forget the name of the church that sponsored our scout troop, but it was down Waycross Road, on the left right before what was the middle school. And that's where we had our scout meetings. Kepler Heights was a school, but there was a church right past it. Yes, I think you're right. Okay.
What was it? First Chapel. It's on the ways, yeah, okay.
So the question was, newsroom a third of its size, early press deadlines, how does that affect the coverage of local news? If anything, it's been better for it. Because I have said in the past, well, we can't let a industry disruption go to waste. What are the things that are important to us? So doubling down on local news, and not just writing what anybody can look up online, but digging in to find the important stories, the why, the accountability factor of those stories. We, for an example, like everybody else, had the story of a 3-year-old that died after being returned to his mother's custody, kind of fell through the cracks of our Child Protective Services. Enquirer had that story. Most of the TV stations had it. And by the way, this is a very competitive television market. As I've been around the country a little bit, it's very rare to have 4 very well-funded television stations doing real local news in one market. I've been in markets, smaller markets, that don't have a dedicated TV station. So, for example, when I, right out of college, went and worked at a small paper in St. Joseph, Michigan, right on Lake Michigan. There's no TV station covering St. Joe. You watch South Bend, Indiana news, and you barely got it. But in here, very competitive. So 4 versions of that same breaking news story. The Enquirer was the only one that went back and tried to piece together a timeline of what happened so we can all learn from it. Where did the system fail? Why did it fail? Understanding better the staffing levels of some of these agencies, and how because of all the stresses that happened during the pandemic we haven't really caught up with, a lot of these agencies are horribly overworked. And so there wasn't like a smoking gun, like, aha, this is the person. But collectively, the safety net failed. So that's the type of high impact work that we can learn from, that kind of shines a light on how we can be better. So that's, to answer your question, that's how we do it. We can't go as wide. And honestly, I don't think wide, when we were able to go wide, when we had 200 people and we went really wide and maybe not deep enough, I think it's better in many ways that we're forced to figure out what is our value proposition, and it is going deep on the topics that matter most.